Since I took office, we cut our deficits by about 2/3, the fastest sustained deficit reduction since just after the end of World War II. We just have to be smarter about how we pay for our priorities, and that's what my budget does.
What's a few $1 trillion among friends, family, and the American taxpayer? No big deal, say it the president. It's all about helping the middle class, building American roads, saving jobs, and still not doing a thing about wasting money like a head football coach wastes. You get the idea. He is the former deputy assistant to Vice President Dick Cheney, contributor to the Daily Beast, now the CEO of Christie Strategies, and as a California native might be suffering a Super Bowl letdown this day. Let's welcome Ron Christie into the show. Ron, good to see you again.
Ed, it's always a pleasure to join you, particularly today from across the pond in London, England.
There you go. So did you at least get a chance to see the game? You did, correct?
I did. It was a late game. It started at midnight over here, but a little late disappointment for the NFC.
Yes, indeed. Let's talk about disappointments, if you will. The president's newest budget. Ron, let's just be real flat about this right out front. Can we just say DOA as far as Congress is concerned on all counts?
On all counts. I think if you look at the irresponsible nature of what this president seeks to do, of A, spending trillions of dollars that we don't have, B, paying for this by hiking taxes on what he calls the wealthy who aren't paying their fair share on tobacco taxes, and C, when you look at the fact that he claims that he's cut the deficit, that's not true. If you look at the amount of money of the national debt, it is absolutely skyrocketed under this president. And so for him to try to claim some sort of fiscal mantle of responsibility with this budget, I think is disingenuous to the American people he was elected to serve.
Calls for $3.99 trillion in spending, $3.53 trillion in revenue, while running a $474 billion deficit. Ron, if you were just standing on the outside looking in, you would swear that this president simply enjoys the theater of all this, just absolutely loves putting the Republicans back in a corner and just seeing how they scurry about trying to get out from underneath his thumb.
Well, Ed, I think that's exactly right. And, you know, I had the privilege to work for John Kasich, now the governor of the great state of Ohio, when he was the House Budget Committee chairman. And when you look at putting a budget together, you have to anticipate how much revenue are we going to bring in over the next 5 years, and how much are we going to spend, not of the government's money, but of the hard-earned taxpayers' money. And what this document that we've seen from President Obama today is nothing more than political theater. It's posturing, it's class warfare, but it does not take a serious and hard look at A, the fact that we're running a significant national debt, and B, he wants to add spending upon spending rather than finding ways of, are we actually allocating the taxpayer's dollar in the most responsible way possible?
Ron, do you get a feeling as if the president is having fun?
Well, sadly, I do. I think he's been emboldened since the elections. I think he's been emboldened by the fact that the American people have spoken and said that they want the size and the scope and the influence of government to decrease and not increase. And I think the president is not only poking his eye at Republicans, but I think he's thumbing his nose at the American people, and he's having a ball. I mean, wouldn't you have a ball if you had Air Force One to fly around the country and stand in front of adoring crowds? But when it comes to leadership, that's what's always been so sorely lacking with this president.
What about the fact that, again, Ron, you've been around government for a long time. Every single day, I tend to look at the waste numbers in government, the tremendous amount of money that is simply being wasted, tossed aside, the ridiculous pet projects that are out there. And everybody I ask who knows anything about the economy will say, if you just stopped the waste, you could then feed kids, you could create jobs, you could fix the roads. Heck, you might even have flying cars at that point if you could get it all done. Yet this president, and let's be fair, this Congress does not seem interested in stopping the tremendous amount of waste we've run up every single year.
That's absolutely right, and that's one of the things I'm so proud about my former boss, John Kasich. He is going around the country, Ed, and he's saying we need to have a constitutional convention to have a balanced budget amendment adopted as part of the United States Constitution. It's clear that it's not just a Democrat problem, it's a Republican problem. It's those who are in Washington who are at the trowel, and they can't get their nose out when they're spending other people's money. We have long since passed the days when we thought, is this the best investment for the American people, as opposed to, can I fund this project, or can I build this bridge or this highway or this road to get myself reelected? It is a crime, it is chronic, and it's something that needs to be stopped. And I don't see any influence by this president or this Congress to really put a dent in spending.
I got about 20 seconds before we take a break. Is this just a gutless Congress and people who are afraid to take away a lot of these pet projects?
Well, I think one thing I do give House Speaker John Boehner credit for is he's never taken an earmark since he was elected to Congress in 1990. I think if he can soften or if he can stiffen the spine of some of his colleagues and work with Mitch McConnell, we can actually make a difference in cutting spending.
All right, stand by across the pond, Ron. We'll be right back. The numbers are in. There is now, of course, no reason for Republicans to fret about 2016. Scott Walker has the nomination all locked up, and everybody else needs to drop out. This, of course, the email possibly being sent at this moment by Walker's team. Facts from fiction. When we return with Ron Christie right here on MidPoint, where we question everything. Back to work. Former Special Assistant to President George W. Bush and Deputy Assistant to Vice President Dick Cheney, Ron Christie joins us on the show. All right, Ron, let's go ahead and turn to politics right now. What do you say? Scott Walker's got it. Put everything to bed. Let's go ahead. Finish it right now. Why waste any more time?
Well, I think you might be right in the fact that the GOP would be wise to nominate a governor, someone with proven executive experience, as opposed to a junior senator who is having on-the-job training as being president of the United States. But I think a lot of the buzz right now is on Scott Walker. I think he's done a great job up in Wisconsin, but I still think there's an opportunity for maybe lesser-known candidates, lesser-known governors to break through. I handicap, and I say with full disclosure, my old boss, John Kasich, is someone I've got my eye on. But for those who think that there's a coronation on the Republican side, or for that matter, that Hillary Clinton is already going to be the 45th president of the United States, I think we have a long way to go between now and next November.
Ron, I know the average American continues to ask the question. People in Iowa would certainly not even like me asking this, but they'll say, wait a minute, this is one state, this is one group of people. We understand it's Iowa, it's very first, but is this really an indicator? And how much should we really allow this to sway our decisions?
No, and it's one thing that's gotten me in a lot of trouble with our friends at the RNC that I have no problem of saying that I believe that Iowa, the first caucus, New Hampshire, the first primary, and South Carolina represent far too much of an influence over the presidential process. And the American people should have the opportunity to have their voices heard, their concerns heard by these candidates, as opposed to people who are catering to 3, 4, 5 states to try to lock up the nomination. I think that does a disservice to our democracy, and you shouldn't put that amount of influence in the hands of so few Americans.
It's funny how you mentioned that there should be a governor in power, and we've heard this before. I read an article this weekend that talked about millennials who actually are going for Ben Carson because they say he is completely out of the normal political loop, if you will, and that's why they like him. Is having someone who is a political neophyte really a good idea when you're looking at someone who will be running the United States and be involved in dealing in foreign policy with the rest of the world?
No, and I can say that from having sat in the Oval Office of the President of the United States more times than I can count. There comes to be a point, Ed, that you need to have executive experience. You need to understand what it's like to be the commander-in-chief of the National Guard in the case of most of our governors in the United States. You need to understand what it's like to write a fiscally responsible budget, and you have to know how to govern. How can you reach across the aisle? How can you work with those who are not in your political party, but to find common ground and to find ways to make sure that the job that you were elected to do is accomplished? I like Dr. Carson a lot. If I had a brain tumor or if I had a medical problem, he'd be the first person on my Rolodex I'd want to call. I would not want to call someone with the crisis that are ranging from North Africa to the Ethiopia to all over the world in this era of terrorism. We don't need a neophyte on the job and the most powerful and important job in the world.
Are he and others simply just at this point, and no disrespect to them, unqualified to be president of the United States?
Well, I just don't think he is. I honestly just don't think he is. I think for having spent 8 years on Capitol Hill and 4 years in the White House, I can tell you that experience actually counts for something. And with all of the challenges facing this country, from domestic issues to international issues to terrorism, this is not the time for on-the-job training, no matter how bright he or she might be, to have a political neophyte run this country.
I wanted to get your opinion on a couple of other names because we're finding out today that former New York Governor George Pataki says he is seriously exploring a Republican bid for president. Your thoughts?
Well, I think Governor Pataki is a fine man. I just don't know whether or not he has what it takes when we talk about Iowa and New Hampshire and South Carolina to have the organization and to have the ability to raise the money that would allow him to be a deep bench candidate. In other words, to go deep in the field. I just don't see it.
All right, there's a second one, too. John McCain apparently said that he would back Lindsey Graham over Sarah Palin. This brings up two ideas. First of all, Lindsey Graham, the possibility of his running. And second of all, it would seem to many people that Mrs. Palin has pretty much torpedoed any chance of her getting it after her appearance in Iowa.
Well, let me take Ms. Palin first. I've always liked Governor Palin. I think it shows what happens when someone who is not ready for the national stage at that level continues to go down one of two paths. One, you can be someone like Governor Perry in Texas and say, I'm going to bring in the best staff. I'm going to bring in folks to really bring me up to speed on the issues. Or number two, I'm going to bull this alone. I've done it before. I've made it thus far. I'm going to keep going alone. I think that's hurt Governor Palin in her speech. Whatever air that was left in her balloon, Ed, I think that popped. And frankly, as you look at some of the others that you've mentioned, I just don't really see the resonance. I just don't see the traction right now. We need a top-tier candidate who can put the staff, the organization, raise the money, and appeal to a wide group of people. And I just don't see it with some of the folks that we've talked about.
And we have tons of months and weeks and many trails to go before we get there. So we'll tell everybody, calm down. We'll cover it all as it comes along. Ron, always a pleasure. Always a pleasure to have you. What now? Go ahead.
I was going to say, always a pleasure to be with you, Ed, and you and I will be on that trail for the months to go. We'll see where we go.
Yes, we will. Come on along. We'll do the trail. Thanks, Ron. Pleasure to talk to you. Take care.
Yes, sir. Take care.
All right. If Republicans truly believe they are on the cusp of a comeback, they need the under 30 crowd to believe the message and carry the torch. You'll meet one of the youngest right-side politicians in the nation when we return right here on MidPoint.